might be better if I switch over so that I can share my screen now. So can you see my screen with the live results?
We can, it's great.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I can see that 52 people have already submitted results. And so far we have 17 people with one child, now 18. Actually, I'm gonna hold off. You can just watch the live results as they come in. But this is a kind of warm-up exercise so that you can get to know using Mentimeter. It looks and sounds like a lot of you are able to use it okay, but if for whatever reason you're having any trouble accessing it, you can either go on your smartphone and you can do it there, or you can open up another window or tab on your computer. So you can do it in a different window from you watching the webinar, or you can use a different device. It's totally up to you. It's pretty flexible, but it looks like everybody is able to access it okay. So I'm gonna continue to hold it on this screen until we see more results, because we currently have 165 people on the webinar, and we currently have about 70 responses. So we'll just wait. So if you don't have children, oh, okay, that's a good question. So if you don't have children, then you don't answer this question. It's as simple as that. Because this webinar is around the child tax credit, and you need to have children to be able to receive the child tax credit. So if the question that comes up on the screen isn't relevant for you, then you don't need to answer. Thank you for asking about that. The other kind of ground rules I wanted to go over was we will be taking questions after each of the speakers present. And so if you have any questions for the speakers, your questions should go into the Q&A box. Do not put your questions into the chat box, and they will not be answered from there. The reason we're doing it that way is because the Q&A box allows you to upvote questions that people submit. And we will be going through the questions depending on, so basically the questions that receive the most number of upvotes, those are the questions that we're going to start with first, and then we will be working our way down. So hopefully that will be helpful for all of you so that we get to the questions that you want to know about, you want the answers to the most faster. I can see some people are having trouble with accessing menti.com. You can try a different device if for whatever reason it's not working very well for you. But I am going to, what's our time now? So we're at 7 past, and it does look like that the participants have leveled off. So we will get started, but I am going to give it another minute because I do still see responses coming in on the question. And I just want to say a big thank you to all of our speakers here today. I really super appreciate all of your time. And those of you all over the world who are joining, I'm sure good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is the first time that we're hosting this kind of webinar, and we're really excited that you're here with us. So it kind of looks like the answers are slowing down a little bit, but it currently looks like most people attending have 2 children, and 1 person has 4 children. So that is awesome. I'm really glad that you're all here. And gosh, it's still going up. So I'm assuming that as we do a few more questions, it might speed up a little bit, but I'll continue to give you another minute. I think we'll do another minute, and then we'll move on to the next question. Okay, wonderful. And again, thank you again, everyone, for joining. For those of you that may have missed what I said at the beginning, we're going to be doing a few questions before the webinar, and then also towards the end of the webinar as well. So this information, we're actually going to use this information to write a letter to the Department of Treasury. We are aware of the child tax credit. A lot of you probably aren't even aware that you're eligible for the child tax credit. So that's why we're hosting this webinar. But we also are hosting this so that we can get your feedback on being able to get the child tax credit. So we're really excited to be able to get your feedback live on this webinar and to use that. Okay, so the answers have slowed down, so I'm actually going to move on to the next question. But that one was kind of like a warm up. Okay, so our next question is, how old are your children? And your screen should have updated for you. And oh, people are getting it already. Okay, so we're getting the live results in right now. This is great. So hopefully on the first round, you were able to get used to using it. And this time, hopefully it'll go a little bit faster. Yeah, I'm seeing lots of results coming in already. So wow, that's great. So it looks like the winner at the moment is most people have children between the ages of 6 and 17. This is wonderful. This is really interesting, isn't this? This is really great. It's really wonderful to be able to see like everyone's profile and like how old their children are and these kinds of things. So I'll give this one a little bit more time. We have over 100 responses now. Can you see how many people have replied in the corner? Is that showing for you as well?
Yes, it's showing.
Okay, okay, so you can see the live count. That's great. Very good. Yeah, and hopefully everybody's able to access the survey now. You can't enter the code. I'm so sorry, Anne-Marie. You can try typing in the code yourself. Hopefully that might help. Okay, it kind of looks like it's leveled off now. So the winner is, we have 74 people here who have children between the ages of 6 and 17. And keep in mind, this was multi-choice. So I'm sure there's some people here that have children between 0 and 5, as well as children between 6 and 17 and beyond. So this is really great. Thank you very much. I'm gonna move on to the next question, which is, so this one, we're going to select, you're going to select all that apply to you. So there's a few different options here. And again, this is to help inform the speakers of where you're at. So you may do, none of your children have a US Social Security number. All of your children might already have a US Social Security number. Some of them might have a Social Security number, some of them don't. Some of you may not have even known that you needed to register your children's birth with the US consulate. Some of you may have tried to register your birth abroad, but you haven't been able to yet. So hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit more about that too. Okay, great. So it looks like most people so far have had their children have their US Social Security number already. So that's great. You're definitely ahead of the game there. And but it looks like there is a good number of people who have not had their children registered with a Social Security number yet. So we'll definitely, the speakers will be going over that today. And also a number of people who have not registered their children's birth yet either. So, oh, good. Okay. It looks like you all are getting used to this. So you're getting faster. That is really great. I think I think we're now leveled off here, but so it looks like 90 of you, all of your children already have a US Social Security number. Oh, now 92. Okay. I thought it had slowed down, but now it's gone up again. Okay, that's great. I'm gonna move on to the next question. Again, just so that we can get a view of who all is here. So the question is, have you filed a 2019 or 2020 US federal tax return? I know that there's a number of people who probably haven't filed or haven't caught up on their taxes. So again, that's something that one of the speakers is going to go over later. But this is just to help us better understand who's in the room and also where you're at in terms of if you have filed or maybe you have, or maybe you don't even know. That's okay. That's why we're here, so that you can better understand what you need to do in order to file. So this is great. You're all getting a lot faster at this. So it looks like most people have filed, which is great. But a good chunk of you haven't. And some people maybe have filed, maybe they don't know, and some prefer not to answer. That's totally fine. No problem. Okay, great. It's leveled off again, so I'm going to move on to our last warm-up question. So our last warm-up question is, are you eligible for the child tax credit? And if you don't know, that is totally fine. You can say, I don't know. That's why I'm attending the webinar. Duh. But yeah, so that's, again, just trying to gauge the room and who's here and trying to figure out. So it looks like most people don't know. Right. Okay. That's really helpful. And some people definitely know, so they've said yes, but some people here are not eligible. So, and some maybe. Ah, this is great. You guys got so much faster with each question. This is wonderful. So, okay, it is very, very clear. The clear winner here is, I don't know, that's why I'm attending this webinar. So totally understand that. We're gonna go ahead and get started there. Brian, do you wanna take over again?
Sure.
So we're gonna go over to slides. Thank you so much for that warm-up activity. Hopefully that made this a little bit easier for the speakers and also helps us better understand who's attending here. Oh. So, great. And so again, some housekeeping just to keep the chat box for announcements. What I would really strongly recommend is, I know that we've already gotten questions in the Q&A. I would recommend that before you submit a question, write down your question on a piece of paper and then wait to submit your question until the presenter has finished speaking. More often than not, we get people who are kind of jumping the gun and submit a question in the Q&A just as the speaker is about to answer that question. So I do recommend that you try to hold off just for a little while, and do make sure that you submit your question using the Q&A box, not the chat box. And make sure that you look through other questions that people have submitted so that we don't have duplicate questions. And then you want to upvote on the questions you want answered the most. Next slide. So this is our agenda for today. I'm going to introduce Candace, who is our brand new, recently elected Democrats Abroad International Chair. She's just going to say a few words for all of you. We've already done the pre-survey, so then we will get straight into it. talking about how to register a birth abroad and obtaining a social security number with Jack and Amy. We'll then go into a births and social security number Q&A. We'll then move on and talk about Taxes 101 and obtaining the child tax credit with Katelynn from Bright Tax. And then we will finish off with the post survey and a few announcements and information from Democrats Abroad. And then we'll wrap up with the taxes Q&A at the end. So that is our agenda. Next slide. So before we get started, I need to go through this formality. So sorry if this is the boring part, but I'll read it quickly. So Democrats Abroad cannot provide individual tax advice. Advice requires consideration of your individual circumstances and needs, none of which can be done on this webinar. We are not tax lawyers, accountants, or advisors. Please consult a professional tax advisor, accountant, return preparer when addressing your personal tax matters. Democrats Abroad does not endorse or recommend companies or individuals attending or hosting this webinar. The views expressed at this event are those of the respective individuals and companies, not Democrats Abroad. No liability is accepted by Democrats Abroad for the opinions expressed or for any errors or admissions expressed about matters of tax in any country, your financial planning, or your legal obligations. If you are in need of tax advice, you can consult the American Citizens Abroad Tax Return Preparer directory to find an advisor or tax return preparer near you, or providing online services to meet your needs and budget, though buyers always need beware. So now with that, I am going to hand it over to Candace to say a few words. Welcome, Candace. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, good morning, Rebecca, and hello to all of you around the world. As Rebecca mentioned, my name is Candace Karistan, and I am the newly elected chair of Democrats Abroad, a Pennsylvania voter based in Munich. And I just wanted again to thank all of you for being here, seeing those results come in. It was very interesting. It looks like we have a lot of young families on the call. So hopefully some very relevant information coming your way about Social Security numbers, registering births. And we really, again, are trying to be a resource and helpful to you as you navigate this process. So this doesn't end here. We do have a permanent taxation task force. Rebecca is a member of that, and we are constantly monitoring legislation coming out of the US, specifically from the lens of how that impacts you, Americans living abroad, American families living abroad. So a huge thank you to Rebecca and the Taxation Task Force for organizing this, for all of the speakers and moderators, and lastly to you for tuning in today. If you aren't a member of Democrats Abroad, we would love to have you. It's open to all US citizens residing outside of the United States, and you can go to democratsabroad.org/join to become a part of our organization. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. And I think we will go into our first speaker. So Amy is, I think, going to go first. I think we have lost Jack, though. I'm not sure where he's gone. But Amy, I will hand it over to you, and you can and kick us off here.
Great, thanks, Rebecca, and thank you, Candace. And good morning, everyone from London. My name is Amy. I'm a U.S. Consular Officer from the U.S. Embassy here in London, and I'm excited to talk with you today. I will be talking about the Consular Report of Birth Abroad and the process of registering the birth of your minor child. So I work in our Passports and Citizenship unit here in London. And as I said, the Consular Report of Birth Abroad, the acronym for that is CRBA. So you might hear me calling that a CRIBA. So let me address what I think might be the most urgent thing for our folks here. If you are in the UK and you've been trying to get an appointment to register the birth of your minor child, please just know that we are far below our normal capacity. So we have only limited appointments available. We release them weekly for the following week. So please just check back frequently. I've had parents come and tell me they were like, every day or every hour checking for appointments. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but it is kind of a limited commodity at the moment. But we do have this as our top priority. It's a service that we're offering as much as we can right now. And we do understand that some people may have urgent travel. So if you have urgent travel, which means within the next 5 days, you can use the contact form on our website to schedule an emergency appointment. Okay, so that might be the thing top of your mind. I can address that further during the Q&A as well. So let me just talk about registering a U.S. citizen child. So a child born outside of the United States to a U.S. citizen parent or parents may be eligible for U.S. citizenship if the parents meet certain requirements for transmitting U.S. citizenship under the Immigration and Nationality Act. A CRIBA should be applied for before the child turns 18, and we recommend that you apply for the child's CRIBA and first U.S. passport well in advance of any travel to the United States if you can. So I'm talking right now about the process of formally determining citizenship, and then the separate agency, the Social Security Administration, they'll assign a Social Security number. So here in London, we are able to do that at the same time. So if a child is applying for a CRIBA, we can also accept the Social Security application form. So how do you request a CRIBA? The first thing you're going to do is go to your closest embassy or consulate. So we have the embassy here in London and then the consulates in Edinburgh and Belfast. And you're going to check their website for US citizen services. If you're phoning in from another country today, go to the consulate or embassy website closest to you and follow their steps. So on the US Embassy website, you'll see that there are 3 forms that you need to bring to your appointment. And I think I have these forms listed on the next slide. Yeah, that's great. So the first form there is the DS 2029, and that's the application for consular report of birth abroad. You'll need to bring several supporting documents along with that form. And we have a handy checklist on our website that you can print out if you want to use the checklist to help you get ready for that appointment. Usually you need to bring the child's local birth certificate, the parents' birth certificates or passports, the parents' marriage certificate, parents' divorce decrees. If the child has dual citizenship, you can bring their other passports. And then in some cases, parents need to show that they've spent a certain amount of time in America. So it's helpful if you have perhaps your immunization record, your high school or university transcripts, or in some cases, prison records can be accepted, and they do put you in a certain place at a certain time. Do note that our photo dimensions are different than European or British passport photo dimensions. So just double check on that when you're bringing your passport photos. And then there are fees associated with each service. The second form you need to bring is that DS11. This is the application for a passport. And you can follow the instructions online for filling that out. The main thing is just to not sign it yet, because the consular officer like me will need to witness the parent signing that for the child. And then finally, like I said, we can accept that SS5, which is the application for a Social Security number. We can only accept it if the child is under the age of 5 and is also applying for a full validity passport, not at an emergency appointment. If the child is 5 or over, then my colleague Jack's instructions will be useful for you. This is also true for the embassies in Belfast and Edinburgh. You'll follow the Federal Benefits Unit's instructions for applying for that Social Security number. Do keep in mind that both parents must attend the appointment with the child, but if one parent cannot attend, then you can use form DS 3053 to authorize the parent who can attend to apply for the passport on behalf of the non-attending parent. Some families just have one parent, and perhaps there's just one parent listed on the child's birth certificate. That's fine as well. We can make accommodations for that. The fee is about $100 for the consular report of birth abroad, and then it's either $115 for a child's first passport, or if the child is age 16 or 17, that's going to be $145 for the passport. So just a reminder, if a child or an adult is a US citizen, they are legally required to enter and exit the US on a US passport. So that's an important thing to keep in mind if your minor child has more than one passport. So just a couple of things. I talked about making an appointment already. Unfortunately, we just aren't at full capacity yet, so keep checking the website of the local embassy or consulate for those appointments. On the day of your appointment, the security at most consulates and embassies is like going through an airport. So it's best if you can leave large bags at home. most embassies won't accept laptops to be brought in with you. So there, you might find a locker nearby where you can store things if you need to have those with you on the day. And then you can pick them up after your appointment. And then we do allow mobile phones in our embassy, but not every embassy does. So just be sure to check in on the security rules there. And then finally, after your appointment, which could be somewhere between 2 to 5 hours, so I do recommend booking aside a whole day for that, or at least half a day. It can be about 4 to 5 weeks for those documents to come back to you. Here in the UK, we use either the DX delivery service or Royal Mail, and those get back to you pretty quickly once we get the documents back from Washington, DC. So that's a quick look into requesting a consular report of birth abroad from the Department of State perspective. I will pass over to my colleague Jack with the Social Security Administration.
Thank you. So thank you everybody for joining us today. It sounds like an interesting webinar behind us on taxes. I want to talk a little bit about the issuing of Social Security numbers. And one of the things that Amy and I had in our presentation that's important to note, when it comes to registering your child, it's really a two-step process. First, we need to have the citizenship determination, which is typically done by the Department of State. Then we issue the Social Security number. And that's important to know because I'm not going to be making US citizenship determination. So I need somebody to tell me that the person in front of me is a US citizen. So that's kind of the tricky part. So as you're rushing through this process to maybe file tax returns, we have to make sure we go through the citizenship determination piece first. Now, Amy talked about if you have a child born in the UK, and I'm going to talk about that group first. And for the context of this show presentation, when I'm talking about children, I'm talking about under 12. There's a different process for over 12s, and I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But if you have a child newborn through 11, the process to apply for a Social Security number does not require a face-to-face interview. If you've registered that child's birth under the age of 5 at the embassy, hopefully you've completed a Social Security card application. What happens with that is when Amy and her team get the passport and CRIBA into the office, they give us a copy of that, pass a piece of paper over to us with the application, and we'll usually process that Social Security card application the week we receive it. So from when you have your passport and your CRIBA in your hand, probably with mail considered, it'll be about 2 or 3 weeks later, you'll have the Social Security card in your hand. That's if you've registered the birth in London. If it's Edinburgh and Belfast, it's going to be a paper process where you will complete a form, an SS5, a Social Security card application. And what you'll do with that is you will be required to mail it to us along with the child's, a combination of the child's passport, the CRIBA, maybe the UK birth certificate and identification, typically a passport for the parent that's signing the application. Now, if you have apprehension about sending those documents in, which is reasonable, you have a couple of options. Any US consulate or embassy can make no fee certifications of these documents to submit with your application for the Social Security number. In the UK, if you use Royal Mail and send it special delivery, we get those packages all the time and we get them usually within a day or two. You send it to us special delivery, we will send it back to you using special delivery. Now, if you have a child that's not born in the UK, the process can vary a little bit from place to place. And the first thing that really matters is, does the embassy or consulate where you're applying have a federal benefits unit? Because if you do, the process can be more integrated, like what Amy and I have talked about, what we do in London. For example, we have in Europe, we have federal benefits units in Oslo, Dublin, Lisbon, Madrid, and London. Those are the ones I work with, but we also have them in Paris, Frankfurt, Krakow, Warsaw, and then some down in Italy and beyond. So how do you figure out where your federal benefits unit is? And there's a link at the screen that says ssa.gov/foreign/foreign. That will have a chart for every country, even for some non-countries like Bermuda, where it will tell you who your servicing federal benefits unit is. Inside of that, there will be an email address where you can ask for guidance. if you go into your own US Embassy website, so if you're in Belgium and you go into the Belgium website and you choose US Citizen Services kind of off of the main banner, there will be a drop down to Social Security, which will route you to the Dublin webpage, because Dublin's going to be the federal benefits unit that takes care of you. What I would say is, if you can navigate the instructions inside of your own webpage, please feel free to, and do that via paper mail. But if you need instructions or guidance or the special considerations, please email your federal benefits unit and they can help. Once the child's 12 and older, things are going to get a little bit trickier. And I didn't prepare a slide for this, but I did learn a little bit about this when we were doing our survey, that we had more people with kids in that age. If they're over 12 and they've never had a US Social Security number, they are going to have to appear at a United States Embassy or consulate for a face-to-face interview. The reason for that is, if you're a US citizen living in the United States, it's very rare that you would be 12 years old and not have a US Social Security number. So for us, that's an indication potentially that there could be an issue of identity theft, and we have to go through an extra level of scrutiny to issue the Social Security number. Those face-to-face interviews can be conducted at a federal benefits unit, but for embassies and consulates without federal benefits, they can be conducted at those places on our behalf. If you have a child over 12 who's never had a number before, I would encourage you to email the servicing federal benefits unit at the link below. Ask them for guidance, and they will kind of help you navigate the country-specific information for arranging an appointment. I will tell you, in London, we have been doing these types of appointments for children and adults during the length of the pandemic, but the increased demand has been crazy, both because of FACTA compliance among the banks has gone up during the pandemic, and then also children, in their teens and early 20s who need numbers for other reasons. Right now, if you contact fbu.london@ssa.gov, we will probably see you towards the end of June, maybe into July, but send us an email and we will book your appointment as soon as we can. Next slide, please. And I think that might be it. So those are all that's kind of the presentation from the embassy in London. We can open it up for questions, Rebecca.
Great, thank you, Amy and Jack. I've kind of had to scan the Q&A because most of the upvoted questions are tax questions, so not relevant for you guys. So I'm gonna go in a slightly different order just so that it's relevant. The first one was a question for Amy. When will London embassy appointments loosen up for child passport renewals? What alternatives could be pursued?
We are accepting appointments for in-person, non-emergency child passport renewals. It's just going to be a matter of getting one of the few appointments that are available. I saw another question asked for the link to that, and I'm just looking for that now as well.
Okay, great, thank you. I had a question. It says, my daughter was born in Belgium and got a CRBA and US passport, but to my knowledge, she has no social security number. Is the social security number automatic? How do you find out about the social security number?
The social security number is not automatic. So if you didn't apply for it, you probably did not get one. For Belgium, they're served by my federal benefits unit in Dublin. What I would recommend doing is emailing fbu.dublin@ssa.gov and just provide the SSA, I'm sorry, I was looking at the closed caption, and just provide the name and date of birth of the child, and they can kind of filter that and give you instructions about how to find out if the child's had a number and if we need to apply for one for the first time. If the child's under 12, that can all be done via mail directly with Dublin. But if it requires going into Brussels for a face-to-face interview, they will help kind of liaise to facilitate that appointment.
Great, thank you. Do both parents need to attend the consular appointment if only one is a US citizen?
That's correct. Both parents need to attend the appointment for a consular report of birth abroad. Typically, it will be only the U.S. citizen parent who signs the application for the consular report of birth abroad, which is the document that determines citizenship. But then since we do the child's first U.S. passport application immediately at the same interview, that is what requires 2 parent signatures, and that's regardless of parent's nationality. So yes, we do need both parents to attend. And I've put the link to scheduling an appointment at the embassy in London on the website there, and then, in the chat box. And then every embassy and consulate has a different link. So, backtrack back through the system if you need to find Belfast or Edinburgh.
Great, thank you. So would it, this is more of a comment, would be great to have help with getting a social security number for my daughter who is 22, born in Belgium to a US father. I've tried first through US consulate in Belgium, then got past a social security center in Ireland, but got no response.
I think if you email fbu.dublin@ssa.gov, if you did that today, I can say with a high level of certainty you will get a response this week. The one issue is that the child is 22, and we're reluctant to have a parent facilitate the process for a 22-year-old because we cannot share information with the parent about a child who's 22. So my recommendation is to have the daughter send the email directly and to have the correspondence with them. If I got a call from a 22-year-old parent, I would just be able to give generic advice, but I couldn't give case-specific guidance.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying. I think this is a question for you, Jack, although it kind of is borderline a tax question. It says, I'm curious if child tax credit is in addition to survivor benefits.
The two would be independent of each other. So you would file your survivor's benefits into your taxes just like you always do based on your 1099, and your child tax credit would be determined based on whatever tax stuff they're about to talk about next, but that's outside of my lane. But their two are not related to each other.
Okay, thanks for clarifying. A question for Amy. In Israel, the ACS has a backlog of over 15,000 applications that require an in-person appearance, such as CRBA, minor child passport renewal. There are a few hundred minors who will not get their CRBA because they are aging out, will turn 18. And there are several thousand citizens who will not get the stimulus check or child tax credits for children born during the pandemic. What can be done to assist U.S. Embassy in Israel ACS clear the backlog?
That's a great question. It is way above my pay grade. I can say that working down this backlog is a top priority for the Department of State, and people several layers in the hierarchy above me, I'm sure, are looking at that closely. I can't speak to that particular situation, but I can say it is a top priority for the Department of State.
Cool, thank you. I think that was all of the Social Security and birth registration questions that were in. The rest of them are pretty much tax questions from what I can see. But did you have any kind of final words that either of you wanted to share?
I just want to say thank you for inviting us. Rebecca, it's always a pleasure to work with DA UK. I am going to drop off so I can get to the embassy and get some kids assigned some social security numbers, but I'll hand it over to Amy.
I echo Jack's thanks, and thanks to everybody here who's had to be patient, who's waited longer than they thought they would have to for an appointment, or who still might be working on getting an appointment. I hope that works out for you soon. And just the taking care of American citizens abroad is the Department of State's top priority.
Great. Thank you so much, both. I really super appreciate your time. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we're now going to get to your tax questions. So Katelynn, would you like to share your screen and take it away?
Yes, thank you very much, Rebecca. I think my slides should pop up now. Again,
Yes,
my name
we
is
see your slide.
Katelynn. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you for confirming.
I see an IRS form.
Oh. Let's try again.
There we go. Thank
There
you.
we go. Okay, perfect. Thanks for confirming. Hello, everybody. My name is Katelynn Minott. I am a CPA and the director and partner at Bright Tax. Bright Tax is a tax preparation firm for Americans outside of the US or with other international circumstances. We acknowledge that tax filing is a complex and overwhelming procedure for many people, and provide a one-on-one CPA relationship to our clients. And if you're interested in learning more about Bright Tax, you can feel free to visit brighttax.com. Today on the agenda in regards to tax, we'll talk about an overview of the US filing rules for Americans abroad, ways to reduce your US tax bill and avoid double taxation, which of course is very important to those who are paying tax abroad, in addition to their US filing requirements. We'll talk about some of the other reporting requirements for expats, the child tax credit, which I've already seen many questions popping up in the Q&A, which is a pretty hot topic at the moment, and I know many of you are anxious to learn more about. We'll talk a little bit about COVID stimulus checks, which have gone out over the last year, 12 plus months at this point. Ways to catch up on your US tax filing exercise if you're behind. And then a brief illustration of some of the financials behind what getting caught up looks like. So every American who meets minimum income thresholds has to file a US tax return. This applies to both Americans inside of the US and Americans who reside abroad. The thresholds are actually quite, well, they're exactly the same. And that's a common misconception that we see with Americans who are overseas. Many people have the perception that if your income is above $100,000 approximately, because that's the foreign earned income exclusion threshold, that you don't have to file US taxes. Here we spelled out some of the relevant thresholds for the different filing statuses. As a single taxpayer, for example, you have to file a tax return once you've hit $12,400 in income. Some of the more surprising thresholds that I'll highlight include the married filing separate threshold. Married filing separate status applies to many of you simply because of the fact that your spouse is not a US taxpayer. In the tax world, we call that a non-resident alien. And most of the time, married filing separate status is going to be the most relevant status for you. And at that status, you have to file a tax return with just $5 of income. So that gets triggered quite easily if you have a bank account producing interest or any small income amounts. Self-employed individuals must file a tax return starting at $400 of income. That has to do with the self-employment tax, which doesn't necessarily apply to all Americans. It depends on where you are residing and if a totalization agreement is in place with the country that you're working in. But that threshold of $400 is relevant for anyone who's working as a freelancer, running their own small business as a sole proprietor, also known as self-employed. Just to underline and reiterate, these thresholds apply to worldwide income. So this is income earned from a foreign employer, foreign investments, in addition to any sort of US sourced income. The relevant filing deadlines for Americans start at the April 15th date. At that date, your tax bill, if you have one, begins to accrue interest. For the 2020 tax return, that date was pushed out to May 17th. So this Monday, we just achieved our first deadline of the year. For those who reside abroad as of that date, your filing deadline is actually extended 2 months automatically to June 15th. If you have a balance due on your tax return, you won't incur failure to pay penalties until June 15th. Only interest will begin to accrue at April 15th. All Americans, both abroad and in the US, can apply for an automatic extension, also known as the Form 4868. And that form allows you an additional 6 months to October 15th to file your US tax return. The IRS automatically approves that extension for anyone who applies for it. And then further beyond that, December 15th is a possible extension for Americans who reside abroad. It's an additional 2 months. It must be filed for via mail, so you have to submit a letter to the IRS. And anyone who's done that recently knows that the backlog at the moment is months, if not years long. The IRS could potentially reject it. So we suggest that December 15th extension is not ideal unless you absolutely have to apply for it, which is the case for some, especially those with filing requirements abroad that they have to satisfy before they file the US tax return. So it is quite common for those December 15th extensions to be filed. Ways to reduce your US tax bill as somebody who resides abroad include, as a start, the foreign tax credit, the Form 1116. The foreign tax credit is, as a tax professional, the first way we always attempt to reduce your tax bill. And the way that it works is that the tax on the US return is going to be reduced based on the tax that you've paid outside of the country. So if you're working abroad and liable for tax in the country of residence where you're working, you can utilize that tax paid to reduce dollar for dollar your US tax bill. That's usually most effective in a country where your tax rate's higher. So many European countries, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, we see that foreign tax credit being a really useful way of eliminating your US tax bill. For other countries where there's no income tax, or perhaps a lower tax rate, the foreign earned income exclusion, the Form 2555, is a great mechanism to reduce your tax bill on foreign earned income. So when I say foreign earned income, I'm referring to wages, self-employment, anything that you actively are producing as an individual. In the 2020 year, the foreign earned income exclusion threshold is $107,600. And that means that you can exclude up to that amount of earned income from your adjusted gross income on the US tax return. Under the foreign earned income exclusion, you have to meet a couple of tests to qualify. The first is the tax home test, meaning you have to have a tax home outside of the US in order to take advantage of this exclusion. Then beyond that, you have to meet either what's called the bona fide residence test or the physical presence test. And those tests evaluate either the number of days, the days that you've spent outside of the US during the year, or alternatively, whether you have a bona fide residence in a foreign country, which is evaluated by a number of different factors, such as the type of residence that you live in, whether it's purchased or rented, whether your family lives abroad with you, whether you pay tax abroad, etc. In the 2020 year, the IRS acknowledged via a revenue procedure that many US taxpayers had to actually relocate to the US because of COVID, or in some circumstances, they became stranded in the US because of COVID. There was relief provided, there's relief provided for those who had to relocate prior to July 15th of 2020. And the days that they spent in the US during the 2020 year are basically ignored for purposes of determining whether you met the foreign earned income exclusion tests. So that provided some taxpayers to actually meet the 2555 exclusion criteria without having a significant foreign presence during the 2020 tax year. Some additional mechanisms and areas that we see people utilize and we're able to help people utilize for purposes of reducing their tax bill include the foreign housing exclusion, in which you can exclude from tax the reimbursement of foreign housing expenses that your employer provides for you. Other popular ones include the child tax credit and the additional child tax credit. And which to choose depends on each expat circumstance. In some cases, the foreign tax credit makes sense because you need carry forward credits to go forward. In some case, the foreign earned income exclusion makes sense because you want your adjusted gross income to be as low as possible for purposes of student loan repayments. Every circumstance is absolutely unique, and it's really important to make sure you're using the best mechanism possible to really optimize your US tax strategy. So in addition to the 1040 and the tax return itself, there are a handful of other reporting requirements that expats have to keep in mind. The first and perhaps most frequently seen is the FBAR, the FinCEN Report 114. And the FBAR is not filed with the tax return. It's filed with the US Treasury in a separate disclosure. But most tax preparers will offer the FBAR filing as part of their services. The FBAR is a report of foreign financial accounts, and it is required if and when you at any point during the calendar year have hit $10,000 or more in foreign accounts. So that might look like a savings account that's tripped that threshold. It might look like a multitude of different accounts, a savings account, a checking account, a pension, that in total sum that $10,000 balance. Highlighting again that it's at any time during the year. So you might sell your car and trip that threshold, but then transfer the money out to pay back the loan. In that case, you're still tripling the threshold and the FBAR is still required. The FBAR does not drive any tax. And the reason that is important is because it's really a disclosure not to avoid. If there's any gray area, if there's any question about whether a certain account should be reported on it, when in doubt, report it. And the reason is that there are high penalties, $10,000 plus penalties associated with the FBAR. And that's definitely not a situation you want to get yourself in when it comes to reporting an account that wouldn't even drive a tax balance anyway. Many banks abroad are requesting from their clients information about whether they're US citizens to start, or US taxpayers. And then beyond that, they're asking for your name, your social security number, which essentially links back your foreign bank account to the IRS system. Many taxpayers confuse that process, that information request, with the FBAR. So it's important to know that even if your bank has requested that information from you, you still need to file the FBAR if you've met the threshold. So in addition to the FBAR, there is a form called the 8938, frequently known as the FATCA form. And that is a very similar disclosure. It's reporting maximum balances just like the FBAR, but it's filed with the tax return instead of as a separate disclosure. The thresholds are a bit different. If you're residing in the US and have foreign accounts, that threshold starts at $50,000 US. If you're residing abroad, the threshold starts at $200,000, so it's quite a bit higher. But again, high penalties, not one to miss. The FATCA, the 8938, is not a tax driving form, so it's certainly one that you want to ensure you're filing if you've met those thresholds. So in addition to the account disclosures, the FBAR and the FATCA, many taxpayers abroad have interests in foreign corporations, foreign partnerships, perhaps foreign mutual funds or other pooled investments. And here we've spelled out the form for 5471, the 8865, the 8621. Those are other frequently seen yet high complexity disclosures, reporting requirements to the IRS that might be required on your annual tax return if you've met certain thresholds in terms of your ownership in foreign entities. So if you have an ownership in a foreign entity, it's a really good idea to check that out. Make sure you're filing if necessary. Penalties are associated with all of these forms, so they're again not forms to miss. So moving on to the child tax credit. Historically, the child tax credit was a $2,000 per dependent child per year credit, of which $1,400 is refundable. In order to qualify, children must have a US Social Security number, and that Social Security number must be valid as of the due date of the tax return. So that relates back to the conversation about obtaining citizen or the report of birth abroad, obtaining the Social Security number. Unfortunately, that Social Security number must be valid by the due date of the return. So for those who had a child with a birth in 2020, we're seeing a lot of people having to extend their 2020 tax return to October and maybe even December for purposes of getting the Social Security number in place and valid by the time they file the tax return. To drive the refundable child tax credit, we suggest filing the 1116, the foreign tax credit, versus the Form 2555. That just makes the numbers line up in a way that's going to drive the refundable portion, the $1,400 credit. The recent American Rescue Plan did expand the credit to $3,600 for those with dependents under age 6 and $3,000 for those that are age 6 and over. I'm sure you've all heard about the advanced portion of that, which is going to begin to be paid in 2021. I wish to highlight that expanded amount is only available to taxpayers who make a home in the US for more than 6 months. So I know that unfortunately that is bad news for most, if not all of you who are residing outside of the States. The $1,400 amount is still available to you as refundable credit. And my understanding is that that will continue to be requested as part of the tax return. So you'll be getting that as part of your tax return filing for next year. For those who are eligible for the advanced payments, their IRS, we expect, is going to be setting up an IRS online portal, similar to what they did for the stimulus payments, the economic stimulus payments last year. And I think that should be rolled out in July of this year, approximately. But that's the information we have to date based on the most recent revenue procedures and the IRS notices. So the COVID stimulus checks are in fact a benefit that US taxpayers residing abroad are eligible for. American taxpayers with a valid Social Security number can take advantage of this benefit. Many of you may have received stimulus checks either in the mail, which of course is another challenge when you're living abroad trying to cash those checks. Some might have received them as a direct deposit into a US account. And the format of these checks was 3 payments. Round 1 went out early last year in the amount of $1,200 per individual taxpayer, and then $500 for the qualifying children associated with that taxpayer. Round 2 was $600 per individual and $600 per qualifying child. And then round 3 was $1,400 per individual taxpayer and $1,400 per dependent. That round 3 is a 2021 payout. And the means of getting that payment, if you haven't received it yet, is by filing a US tax return. For round 1 and 2, if you file your 2020 tax return and your income is within the thresholds that are associated with the stimulus checks, then you can simply get that amount as a refund on your return. The round 3 payment, we don't expect to be available to you until next filing season. Again, if you haven't received it yet, you would request it as a refund as part of next year's tax return. So learning about some of these benefits that are available to US taxpayers, and you know, perhaps not knowing about your filing requirement in the past triggers a lot of questions about how to get caught up if you've not filed tax returns in the past ever, or if you've lapsed filing tax returns since you moved abroad. What is the best way to get caught up and ensure that you're compliant and also eligible for some of these benefits? The IRS offers what is called the streamlined filing procedure. And the streamlined procedure has 2 different versions. There's an offshore version and then there's a domestic version, suggesting that the offshore version is probably the best fit for those who reside abroad. The streamlined procedure is a penalty-free way of getting caught up and compliant. It does require absence from the US for 330 days during one of the 3 past due tax return years. So at the moment, if we were to file a streamlined procedure today, we would file 2017, 2018, and 2019 tax returns because those are the 3 years that are most recently past due. If we file after June 15th of this year, then the scope would shift from 2018 to 2020. That said, the streamlined procedure does get sent in the mail. So if you're hoping to get a quick turnaround on the stimulus payment, for example, it might be worth extending to 2020's deadline to October 15th so that you can electronically file 2020's tax return and only submit 17 through 19 on the streamlined procedure in the mail. In addition to 3 tax returns, the streamlined procedure also requires that you file 6 years of past due FBARs. So that FBAR disclosure that we talked about where you're reporting your bank accounts abroad, that one is going to need to go back 6 years in total for purposes of the streamlined procedure. And while you're submitting these returns and these FBARs in the mail, you're going to put a cover letter called the 14653. And that cover letter essentially certifies that your failure to file was non-willful conduct, meaning you had life circumstances or whatever circumstances that prevented you from filing in a timely manner. That may mean that you didn't know you had to file. It may mean that you had personal, financial, or medical reasons that prevented you from filing in a timely manner. There are, of course, an array of personal circumstances that could lead to a streamlined procedure, but it's key that you were not attempting to hide anything, which is, of course, not the case for most people. In addition to the non-willful conduct requirement, it's important that the IRS has not contacted you first. So once the IRS has reached out and said, hey, taxpayer, where's your returns or where's your FBARs? At that point, it's unfortunately too late. So the key in this procedure is that you beat them to it, you get ahead of it, and you file your US tax returns before they're asking them for them. So a brief illustration about the benefits of filing a tax return, the potential stimulus payment that you might get as a result of filing the tax return, and then the child tax credit versus the cost of getting caught up by filing a streamlined procedure. So this illustration relates to a family of 4. Their children are under age 17, and the whole family has US Social Security numbers. Round 1 meant $1,200 per individual taxpayer, and I won't spell out every single number on here, but if you add up the 3 rounds of stimulus payments, the child tax credit for their 2 children, you're going to wind up with a total refund of $13,000 when you add up all the stimulus payments and the refundable child tax credit. And here, this illustration is actually only showing the child tax credit for 1 year, where it could potentially be coming back for 3. For those of you who might have just realized that you were not taking advantage of the child tax credit, it's possible to request 3 years back. The technical term is the statute of limitations, which is 3 years. The IRS is required to pay out a refund to you 3 years after, up to 3 years after the deadline of the tax return. So to provide an illustrative example, if you wanted to request the child tax credit on the 2017 US tax return, which was due June 15, 2018, you would be able to make that request up until 19/20/21. June 15th, 2021 is your last opportunity to request the child tax credit for that year, assuming the 2017 return wasn't extended. The cost of catching up, of course, can vary widely from firm to firm. With Bright Tax in particular, the cost that we charge for assisting you in the tax preparation exercise can range anywhere from $1,000 to about $1,500, depending on your personal circumstance, the complexity of your situation, and the returns that you require. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. I see lots of questions popping up, and I know this is the Q&A portion of these is always, a very valuable portion. So I think we'll dive right in.
Thank you, Katelynn. So we're actually going to go to our post survey before we get into the questions. So we're going to go back to the Mentimeter quiz again, or survey, and it's the same code as before. I think Charlie's going to put that into the box, but basically now that you've sat through the webinar, now that you know more about the child tax credit, are you eligible for the child tax credit? So this is really useful for us to know. And we're going to be using this information to, so to clarify, we're hosting this webinar to help educate you on how to get the child tax credit. And hopefully it's at least a little bit clearer. But another reason we're hosting this webinar is because we've identified that American families abroad aren't eligible for a refund on the full $3,000 or $3,600 child tax credit, or are eligible to receive the advance payments that are going to be starting in July. And we think that's unfair. And this is an inequality where American families abroad are being disadvantaged and aren't being treated the same as American families in the US. This is one of many instances that Americans abroad have faced where we get different discriminatory treatment from Americans in the US. So this is where we're trying to advocate for you on your behalf to make the tax system fairer for Americans abroad. But we haven't heard from you on this topic. So that's why we're hosting this webinar. And so we want to hear from you. And so it looks like it's kind of leveled off on the questions now, but it looks like most of you are eligible. Some of you are still kind of maybe. And also some of you still don't understand and aren't clear. So I'm hoping that once we get to the Q&A section, maybe it will be a little bit clearer. I'm going to give it a little bit longer because we were getting a few more responses before, but it's the same link as what was shared at the beginning of the webinar. And the next questions we're going to be asking you, what is it that you want Democrats abroad to be advocating on your behalf? Do you think that American families abroad should be able to get a full refund on the full up to $3,600 for the child tax credit, not just up to the $1,400? And even if you've not lived in the US for half the year? And do you actually need to receive the advance payments that have been made available to American families in the US? So I'm going to go to the next question because that should, this is where we're going to kind of get into this. So do you actually plan to file your US tax return to obtain the child tax credit now at this point? Do you agree or strongly disagree with that? Or do you just feel like there's too many hoops for you to jump through to obtain the child tax credit? Is this too complicated? For a lot of people, this is very complicated. It's very difficult. Do you believe that American families abroad should be able to get the full refund and not just on the $1,400? And also, do you believe that American families abroad should be able to receive the advance payment that's starting in July? And how urgently do you need the additional portion of the child tax credit as a refund? So all of these things are really, really helpful for us to better understand and know what you want us to be advocating for on your behalf. So this is really helpful. And it looks like it's kind of all over the map in terms of where the hoops are. I'm not sure why it's showing up as multiple different ones. It should be an average. Oh, it's because I'm hovering over it. Oh, okay, cool. Sorry, this is the first time I'm doing this. So it kind of breaks down a little bit in terms of like where people are at. And so it looks like most people feel like it's too many hoops to jump through to obtain the child tax credit, so they're not going to file. I don't blame you. This is really complicated stuff. you know. At the same time, there's an equal mix of people who are planning on going ahead and filing it here. So that totally understand. You want to get that money, totally get that. And then people do believe that American families abroad should be able to get the full amount of the child tax credit. And also, yeah, most of you also believe that American families abroad should be able to receive the advance payments as well. So, and then in terms of urgency, it looks like it's kind of an even spread, but more or less it's not so urgent for you to be able to receive the advance payments. So, okay, that's really, really helpful. Should I, looks like the numbers have leveled off a little bit. Is that right? Okay, so then we have one more. Sorry, we have two more. So quickly, it would be helpful to know if you could rank these options for how you'd want to receive your child tax credit. So do you want it paid into your US bank account? Do you want it paid into your non-US bank account? Would you want to be mailed a US check? Oh wow, people want to be mailed the US check, cool. And or none of these options, like that it just doesn't work for you there. So this is really helpful to be able to understand how you would prefer to receive the child tax credit. That's not to say this is how it works. I think there might be a question that we'll go over that in the Q&A, but this is just so that we know what you want, so that we as Democrats Abroad can advocate on your behalf of what you actually do want. So that would be really helpful. And so far, it looks like most of you want to be paid by direct deposit into your US bank account. That's really interesting. We've been helping people receive their economic stimulus payments over the last year. And a lot of people have struggled with getting direct deposits, not only in their US bank account, but they haven't been able to receive it into a non-US bank account because the IRS just doesn't do direct deposits into non-US bank accounts. But it is really, really helpful to know which method you would really prefer to receive it in. So it looks like it's leveling off again. So I'm going to move on to our last and final question. So when and how would you want to receive the child tax credit? So one of them is, I can wait and receive it as a lump sum when I file my US federal tax return. Some people might need it as soon as possible. And also it would help to receive it as the 50% in 6 advance installments between July and December, which is what the advance payments are that is happening for American families in the US. And then you'll get the other half when you file your tax return in the next year. But it's really, really helpful for us to know, what do you want? What are your preferences? How do you want us to be advocating for you on your behalf? So this is really helpful. So it looks like most people at the moment can wait, but there are a good chunk of people who do need it as soon as possible. And also it would help for them to be able to receive it in the installments as well. So I'll give it another minute or so. And if you haven't done yet, please do look through the Q&A and upvote on the questions that you want answered most. That is going to really, really help us in terms of prioritizing the questions that we're going to go through during the tax Q&A here in about a minute. So I will give it another second for responses because they're still coming in. And yes, please do make sure that you ask your questions in the Q&A box. We will not be addressing questions in the chat box. So make sure you put your questions into the Q&A box, please. Okay, it looks like it's leveled off again. So thank you again, everyone. I really appreciate it. I think that's the end. That is the end of it. Yes, that is the end. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And we're going to get back to the Q&A. So let's look at the first question here. So the one that has been voted on the most, and it's been the highest question in the Q&A box since the beginning. So I might as well get to it. So it says, can we get the child tax credit if we file married filing separately? I file this way because I want to keep my non-citizen husband from having to interact with the tax system.
Yes, so it is possible to receive the child tax credit when you're filing as married, filing separately. It's not a given. It depends on your income. It depends on the way that you are reporting, whether it's the foreign tax credit, foreign exclusion. So it's possible, yes. To kind of underline the questions that are associated with that initial question, I know a lot of people have questions about what filing status to use. If you have a spouse that is not a U.S. taxpayer and non-citizen, non-green card holder, and non-resident in the U.S., then you're probably going to be filing married, filing separately, or head of household. Head of household would be if you have US dependent children and you're providing more than 50% of the support of the household. So filing single, if you're married, is not the correct status to utilize. I know that many people are kind of forced into that status because many of the online tax prep programs don't allow you to file separately with someone you don't have a social security number for. So it kind of creates a logistical nightmare trying to get that return filed accurately. But married filing separately would be probably the most accurate filing status for you in that circumstance.
Great, thank you. The next one is, do we get the credit if we file using the exclude foreign earned income?
So if you use the foreign earned income exclusion, your AGI is going to be wiped out and it won't drive any sort of child tax credit.
Okay, so you have to file for the foreign tax credit to receive the child tax credit. Is that right?
You need to use one of the mechanisms, right? That would be the one to use.
Okay, yeah, that's a question that comes up a lot, so it's really helpful to clarify that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you get back credits for past years even if you haven't filed for years?
So you would need to file those tax returns and request the credit back. That illustration regarding the statute of limitations being 3 years, the 2017 year is about to expire, so that would be as far back as you could possibly go. But 2018, 19, 20, of course, all fair game.
Great. I file as head of household with a non-citizen husband. Can I claim the child tax credit?
You can, as long as you have US citizen dependent children with social security numbers.
I file as married filing separately with a non-citizen spouse. It's a pain because I can't seem to e-file with TurboTax due to this.
Yep, that's exactly what was highlighted, and the fact that your spouse doesn't have a social security number is going to prevent TurboTax from being a useful tool. Rebecca, yesterday you highlighted another online software program that seemed to be working for people. Do you remember what that was called?
Yes, it's called OLT. It's a free file option on the IRS's website. So on the IRS's website, they list lots of different kinds of free file options that you can use, like online tax preparation software. Very, very few of them actually work for Americans abroad. But the one I am hearing of most at the moment that does work is called OLT. I've just put it in the chat box. It would be really super helpful if you could email us and let us know if it does work for you. Any kind of helpful feedback back to Democrats Abroad helps us in terms of spreading the word on what does and doesn't work. The other thing I would note here is that we recommend that you do not use TurboTax, not only because it doesn't work for Americans abroad, but also because TurboTax spends millions of dollars lobbying Congress to keep taxes complicated. And so we don't think that we want to make filing easier for Americans abroad. So on that point, I would recommend not using TurboTax from an ethical perspective.
Yeah, and I guess TurboTax, the reason you can't use that, it's a logistical software based problem. It's not because you, as somebody who's married filing separately, can't file electronically. As professional tax preparers, we do this every single day for our clients, and there are some programs that you can do it yourself on. So it's a TurboTax specific issue.
Yeah. So next question, when can I expect to receive child tax credit if I file my extension and proceed with filing before the October 15th deadline? Will I receive it this year or 2022?
So if you're eligible for the child tax credit, that credit is associated with your tax return. So it's driven by when you file the return. So if we're talking about your 2020 tax return and the associated child tax credit, and you submit that electronically, ideally have a US-based account to direct deposit the refund into, historically, we've seen turnaround times of about 2 to 3 weeks in getting that refund into your account. The IRS right now is slower than usual, but the timing will be directly a result of when you file your tax return. And if you do it electronically, it will be months, maybe even years faster than doing it in the mail.
Great. If I am claiming the foreign earning income exclusion, does the foreign tax credit apply to taxes paid on all income or only tax paid on income after the 107,600? Can these be compoundedly used, exclude income up to 107,600 and exclude taxes paid on all income?
Yep, that's a great question. So the foreign earned income exclusion and the foreign tax credit can be used together. How they can't be used is on the exact same income. So to illustrate an example, if you're earning $150,000 of income and you utilize the foreign exclusion, you're going to wipe out that first, let's call it $110,000 of income using the foreign exclusion. It's actually $107,000, but the portion above the foreign exclusion threshold, so that $40,000 of remaining income, you can use the foreign tax credit on that portion of your income. What you can't do is apply the tax you paid on the first $110,000 to the second $40,000. You can only use tax paid on that $40,000 to offset the tax associated with the $40,000. I may have everybody's head spinning already, but the short answer is you can use them together at the same time. You just can't use them on the same amount of income.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. That's really helpful. The next one is, I have always used the foreign earned income exclusion, but for the first time, I also have income in the US from an inherited IRA from my mom's death. I'm not sure whether to change to filing under the foreign tax credit. Finland has high taxes, and not sure what that means in terms of other benefits like the child tax credit. A follow-up question on that is, I read that if you filed with foreign earned income exclusion 1 year, you are stuck with this for 5 years. Is this the case? We inherited IRAs also for this year, but filed it with foreign earned income last year.
Okay, so this is a multifaceted question, but to start, this taxpayer is using the foreign exclusion. And she is going to inherit an IRA and perhaps have distributions from that IRA. Whether the foreign exclusion is going to be effective it won't, of course, wipe out the income associated with the IRA, but you still have a standard deduction available. Depending on your filing status, that might be $12,000, it might be $24,000 to potentially address and eliminate the income tax associated with the inherited IRA distribution. Whether filing the foreign tax credit will be effective actually depends on the details of the tax treaty between the US and Finland, because an inherited IRA is US sourced income. So unless a treaty provides otherwise, the US sourced income cannot be utilized for, or the foreign tax credit can't be utilized for US sourced income. In order to use the form 1116, the foreign tax credit, you have to have foreign sourced income. Now, that said, the treaty may address the inherited IRA distribution and say someone who lives in Finland can treat an IRA, even though it's based in the US, as foreign source, as Finnish sourced income. I don't know the definitive answer to that. I don't know the treaties by memory because there's so many provisions and they're so complex. But the possibility of using the foreign tax credit would have to be via a foreign tax treaty provision, the Form 8833. What that means in terms of other benefits, the IRA doesn't necessarily impact the other benefits, except that it could potentially put your income outside of the threshold to make you eligible for the child tax credit. In the follow-up question, if you file with the foreign earned income exclusion, the Form 2555, here it's suggesting that you're stuck with it for the next 5 years. It's actually the reverse. If you're using the foreign earned income exclusion and you decide to stop using the foreign exclusion, discontinue use of that election, which is called the 9/11 election, the Section 9/11 election, then you can't go back and use it again for another 5 years. So if you decide to stop using the foreign earned income exclusion, you better be sure that the foreign tax credit is going to cover you on your tax bill for the next 5 years, because you can't go back and use it again. So opting out of the foreign exclusion is a decision you have to make very carefully. But there's no reason you can't use the foreign earned income exclusion for your earned income in Finland or in the foreign country, but then apply the foreign tax credit to the inherited IRA if the treaty allows you to do so. So that's kind of a very detailed example, but I think could be relevant to a lot of different people.
Thank you. We're coming up on the end of our time. I'm going to do a few more of the top upvoted questions, and then we're going to wrap up. So the next one is, my baby will be born at some time during 2021. How can I receive the child tax credit payments? What happens if his Social Security number takes time to receive?
So if your baby's born in 2021, the child tax credit associated with your baby won't be available to you until 2022 when you're filing the 2021 tax return. Make sure you have a Social Security number by the deadline of the 2021 return, which might be April if you're living in the States. It could be June if you're living abroad. You can extend it to October automatically, and then there's the final extension available to December 15th. So those are your possibilities timing wise, but you make sure you get that Social Security in hand in whatever way you can.
My child is 22, has a US passport, but not yet a Social Security number. She has never lived in the US. Does she need to pay tax?
The tax filing requirement is driven by income, not by age, not by Social Security number, not by residential location. It's how much income you're earning at the certain thresholds that are established by the US. Those thresholds are the ones that I shared on my slides, and you can find them on the IRS website as well, but they're relevant to taxpayers in and out of the US, regardless of their age. So maybe is the answer here.
And also to clarify is that regardless of whether or not they've lived in the US before or not.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So will I be penalized for not claiming the foreign earned income exclusion, and will I be able to claim it in the future? So
there's no penalty for not claiming it. You're perhaps losing out on a benefit or getting taxed unnecessarily. You can, so I suppose this person's question is maybe they've been living abroad for 10 years and never taken advantage of the foreign exclusion. You can start at any time. There's nothing preventing you from doing so, starting now or starting whenever you decide you want to. So no penalties associated there.
Great. So our last question is, I received the first payment of the economic impact payments, but not the second or third. For the second, that was a while ago, and I have not found a way to talk to the IRS about it. What type, when I type my foreign address in online tracking option, no information is available.
Yeah, this is a common one. If your tax return wasn't filed maybe within the window associated with the stimulus payment, then that could end up happening. If you didn't receive the second payment and you did receive the first, on the 2020 tax return filing that you can submit now, there's a worksheet that you can fill out to say, this is the amount I received, this is the amount I was eligible for during the whole 2020 year. So that will end up being a refund on your 2020 tax return. If for some reason the IRS sent out a check last year and it just didn't hit your mailbox, they could potentially disallow that refund. And the challenge there is that there's a whole process of calling the IRS. issuing a check trace to make sure that no, it actually wasn't deposited, and then they could potentially reissue the refund to you. Unfortunately, the IRS portal is not working for those with foreign addresses. That's another challenge that Americans abroad are facing every single day, that many of the IRS systems are not built for foreign addresses. But if you're able to get through on the phone to somebody, you might need to make a phone call and ask the status of your stimulus payments to understand and ensure that nothing's floating around in snail mail space. But otherwise, that's the way to obtain your refund. For the third check, you'll need to wait until next year's tax return filing.
Awesome. So we've finished our tax Q&A. I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but hopefully you got answers to most of your questions. And obviously Katelynn's contact details have been shared so that you can get in touch with her and Bright at democratsabroad.org. And thank you again, everyone, for attending. Everybody will receive a follow-up email with the link to the recording that will be posted on YouTube. And feel free to share that link with friends and family that you think is relevant, as well as the slides, which will be shared with you as well. So yes, thank you very much, everyone. This concludes our webinar today.
And Katelynn, thank you so much for being in Massachusetts at this hour. Wow.
No problem. Thank you.